90% of the time when you're building Laravel applications, you might never need to actually test your authentication API because you might never actually need to customize it. But then in cases where you've created classes, created different methods, and actually customized the login, it's really helpful to write some tests. So let's go ahead and create a helpful test that is going to help us test our login functionality. So PHP artisan make test login test. Okay, so in my test directory, sure enough, under feature, we have this login test. I'm going to clean this up and I'm going to create public function test a user. And actually the first thing I want to test is actually the message that we receive when the user does not pass in the correct credentials. Okay, so test a user receives correct message when passing in wrong credentials. Okay, so that's a really crappy name, but at least it's descriptive of what we want to do. How is this test going to look? We just need to get a user and then maybe call that login endpoint passing in the wrong password and then make some assertions on the response, right? So let's go ahead and take care of this. First of all, our user is equal to our factory for the broadcast user class, and we'll call the create method to persist that. Awesome. So we just need to say this post JSON because that's the kind of post request we are making, and our endpoint is /login, and we need to pass in the data that we send into the server right here in an array. So we're passing in the email and we'll pass in the user's email that was generated, and we'll pass in a fake password, right? So let's just say wrong password. And then right on our response, we can actually call assertions. So assert status for this response would be 422. So we are asserting that the status must be a 422. And let's also assert that the JSON contains a message, the message that we are passing in, and we'll get this message from our auth failed exception class, right? So I think for now we could actually work with this, and this is simply gonna make sure that everything we're doing is working, right? So create a user, make a post request to that endpoint, pass in the email, the password, and then assert that the status is 422, and also assert that the JSON response that we receive contains a message key with this exact string. Okay, so how do we run our test? We could use Laravel's refresh database thread, and we need to set up a little bit of PHP unit configuration for our application during testing. So I'm gonna pass in an environment database right here. So DB connection should be SQLite testing, which I'm gonna set up. So I'm gonna set up a testing connection, and I'm gonna actually make sure I tell PHP unit to run our test in memory. So DB database, and I'm gonna pass in a memory flag right here. Awesome. So let me set up this testing database connection in my database.php configuration file. So we have SQLite connection, MySQL connection. I'll set up testing connection. This receives an array, and the driver is also going to be SQLite. Database is going to be from the database path, and we'll get testing.sqlite. Okay, so let's generate the testing.sqlite file. So touch in our database directory /testing.sqlite. And sure enough, we actually want to check in our database directory, we have our testing.sqlite. Okay, so I think we're ready to run our test. Let's try to see what we get. So in my vendor directory, in my bin, I have my PHP unit executable, and I'm going to filter this to login test. So let's run that. And sure enough, we have a successful test, right? So because we actually already wrote the production code for that test.